think we're all healthy most of the time, but there are times we get sick, and sometimes we get really, really sick, and the consequences can be quite serious. There are several problems with our health system. First, we actually treat people after they get sick. We actually don't do much to keep them healthy and understand what's going on while they're healthy. And the other is we're in a one-size-fits-all. We basically give people the same treatment even though we're all individuals and even though the way we may respond will be very different. So what I think we need to do is switch from this one-size-fits-all to something that's individualized, where every person's treated according to their genetics, all their life history, and their environmental exposures. There's an amazing revolution going on right now. Omics is really seeing the entire collection of molecules that make up you. Basically, it's your DNA, it's your proteins, it's all your metabolites and such. The sequencing of the human genome was a huge major step in making all this happen. So for the first time in 2001, people were able to decode the DNA of a human being. And that basically set up a reference onto which we could actually do a lot of the mapping we're talking about. We can now sequence people's DNA and understand their genetic basis of disease at a level that's never been possible. Mass spectrometry lets us follow tens of thousands of molecules. And because of this, we're getting an IMAX-like movie of what's going on when people are healthy and when they're sick. In many respects, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. A jigsaw puzzle can be made of 1,000 pieces. And you don't really see the picture until you put all those pieces together. That's the same for omics. You basically try and understand all the individual pieces so you can see the whole picture. NASA Twin Study is an amazingly unique study where we're studying Scott and Mark Kelly. In this study, we have one twin launching into space, undergoing incredible stress responses during launch and during the time he's living in space. And the other twin, the identical twin, is living on the ground a normal life. And really what's nice about omics is we're going to see a picture of both of these astronauts at a level that's never been looked at before. We're going to be making billions of measurements of the one on the ground and the other one in space. And we'll see what space really does to the human body. I think this study will be very valuable for understanding space travel because ultimately we hope to send people to Mars. And that's going to be a long period, probably several years. And by getting this IMAX type movie of what's going on as people see space radiation, space food, all the environmental impact of space, we'll be able to better treat, hopefully, astronauts and manage their health while they go on this incredible journey. Omics is really an amazing field where we can look at people and their health at a level that's never been possible before. And with that, we'll be able to better manage people's health and try and keep them healthy, again, long before they get sick. Many children are born each year with a serious genetic defect, and in fact 25 million Americans will have some sort of genetic defect for a major disease that they'll encounter. there's been just a technological revolution. That is to say, we can now sequence people's DNA and understand their genetic basis of disease at a level that's never been possible. There's new equipment out there that lets us do this for the first time, and that's really just come about in the last decade. Before, this was an incredibly challenging task. It took 2,000 people about 10 years to be able to sequence the first human genome, and it cost somewhere between $0.5 to $1 billion. Now you can do it in less than 2 weeks for probably on the order of about $2,000. We all start out as a single cell and we grow into a complicated human being. And your DNA is the instruction manual for making that happen. Your genome is your entire collection of DNA. And your DNA is really made of 4 chemicals or 4 letters that are strung together in a very particular sequence. So if we took all the DNA in our body and actually strung it end to end, it would take us all the way to Pluto and back. When you get your DNA sequence, you actually try and decode what the exact order of those letters are. And with that DNA sequence, you can then try and understand how different traits arise. Your genes are really the things that, in fact, make those traits like your eye color and your height. It also controls things like depression and autism. So your DNA really controls many aspects of who you are. What's amazing about the twin study is that we'll be able to tell what factors are causing environmental influence on a person and their health, and which ones are really genetic. They're identical twins, meaning they largely have the exact same DNA. And so when one goes into space, he's undergoing a certain environmental stress, undergoing the forces of space, whereas the other one's living a normal life on the ground. These guys are essentially genetically identical, so any differences they have are due to environmental encounters. If we're going to send someone on a 3-year mission to Mars, we really have to understand in detail what's going to happen to them and how to best keep them healthy. This will be incredibly relevant to us on Earth because essentially, as we see how people are living in space and the kinds of genetic factors that can help protect people in space, some of those same things will be very valuable for people on Earth. By reading your DNA, we hope to see what kinds of diseases you're at risk for, what kinds of genetic information protect you to certain kinds of stresses is really valuable just in general. Forty 40% of people will get cancer at some time in their lifetime. So what this means is that if you're not one of those 40%, you will know someone, probably someone you love, who will in fact get cancer. Now, cancer is a genetic disease, and it is in fact caused by changes in your DNA. But it doesn't happen directly. It's how your DNA gets expressed. Your genes are the control system for making different cell types. They do so through a close copy of itself called RNA. Basically, your genes get turned on in a process called transcription, and the RNA that gets made are in fact called your transcripts. So your entire collection of RNA is called your transcriptome. And really, this is the, if you will, it's a closer set of information that's ultimately going to get turned into proteins. For the first time, we can now analyze the whole transcriptome of all the different cells in people's bodies. So we understand the transcriptome of your skin cells and your brain cells. Now, the reason this is important is that when people get disease, actually their transcriptome changes. They actually wind up with a different set of RNAs and making proteins they probably shouldn't be making at the wrong time. So, for example, when you get cancer, you're making proteins that cause cells to divide and grow uncontrollably. And so basically those transcripts for those genes that cause cells to grow uncontrollably are getting turned on when they shouldn't. And so we'd like to understand how this whole process works so that we can ultimately control it. So for the NASA twin study, again, we're going to be studying how the genes are turned on and off by basically following their RNA and their transcriptome. We'll follow Scott while he's in space and see what kinds of changes he undergoes. And as a control, we'll see how Mark, who's living a normal life on the ground, changes his transcriptome, which probably won't be very much. This will give us an unusual glimpse of how gene activity changes as people go in space, which will be valuable for understanding what's going to happen when they're in a prolonged mission to Mars. So the way this relates to people on Earth is that we're actually following people currently as they get various diseases and as they undergo various stresses. And we'll be able to compare what's going on with Scott with people on Earth to understand what kinds of stresses elicit what kinds of responses. And that is, how are they turning on certain kinds of genes under certain kinds of conditions. Ultimately, this will be very valuable for being able to try and control the expression of those genes, or possibly just diagnosing disease early so we can catch disease early and ultimately treat people, in fact, before they get symptomatic. Seventy 70% of Americans are on at least one prescription drug, and 50% are on at least two, and 20% are on a whopping 5 or more drugs. The targets of drugs are typically proteins, which are the things that do the work in your body. So your proteins come from your DNA, but they're not made directly from your DNA. They're made through RNA, which in turn instructs your cells to make the proteins. Now, the collection of proteins is called the proteome. For the first time, we can really see thousands of proteins at once. We use a technique called mass spectrometry, which lets us follow these thousands of proteins in your blood. We often analyze proteins in people's blood, and the reason for that is that the blood is the garbage can, if you will, of your body. So when you get sick, cells will often die, or viruses will cause problems and things, and it will wind up shedding diagnostic proteins into your blood. And so what researchers often try and do is study people's blood to see if they can see some of these unusual proteins and see if something's wrong with the person. Now, we're often trying to discover new proteins, and those are called biomarkers, that reflect something's wrong with someone's health. So ideally, we would like to have markers for every disease you can imagine and be able to follow that in a very simple blood test. For example, when men get prostate cancer, often they make a particular protein called PSA that gets elevated, and it's due to the fact that the cancer cells tend to have more of the protein than would normally be present. So analyzing the collection of proteins gives us a better idea of what kinds of things we might use for therapies. Now, we can also combine this with DNA information as well. We can actually predict people's drug responses and drug doses based on their DNA sequence. Some people will get very nasty side effects of various drugs based on their DNA sequence. So we'll be studying in incredible detail the proteomics in the blood of Scott, who's in space, and Mark, who's on the ground, during this whole year and even beyond. And basically we want to see the changes that occur and discover biomarkers that might be indicative of the different kinds of stresses they might be encountering. So Scott, after he blasts off, will feel a lot of G-forces, and that'll cause some kinds of stresses. And we'll be able to see what proteins change after that happens. And likewise, we'll be able to see what kinds of protein changes occur while he's traveling along in space and after he returns back to Earth. And so by having the sequence of the astronauts, we'll be able to better understand what kinds of drugs they should avoid and what kinds of doses they should get. This is going to be very valuable for long journeys in space because we want to get the right drug dose to the right person at the right time. So in summary, proteomics is an amazing field where you can follow biomarkers and learn all kinds of changes in people's bodies and as they travel through space. Did you know your environment has a profound impact on your DNA and your health? Basically, everything you do, your exercise, the food you eat, the various life stresses, can impact your DNA directly. Your environment can either chemically modify your DNA or it can in fact affect the way it's packaged. It can modify the packaging material that surrounds your DNA and determines whether genes are turned on and off. Now the collection of modifications, either the direct effect of modifying the DNA or modifying the packaging material, is called epigenomics. It basically is highly cued by the environmental influences that impact it. In fact, what you may not realize is that your aging is a genetically determined response. You don't just wear out. You in fact are programmed to get old and die. And so people are trying to actually figure out how to control this so that they can basically live longer, healthier lives. So when astronauts go into space, they undergo incredible stress, and they're also exposed to radiation. In space, people are very concerned that aging actually may be accelerated by all the radiation damage that occurs. And so one thing you can follow is in fact the ends of people's chromosomes are called the telomeres. And the telomeres are very important for protecting the ends of your DNA, and they're thought to be useful for protecting aging as well. And so one of the things we'll be doing is following people's telomeres as they're in space. One of the other things we'll be doing is following the collection of these epigenetic changes. And the reason we're doing that is because we know that they are modified by stress. And so we'd like to understand, as Scott is traveling in space, what kinds of changes might occur on the DNA or on the material that's packaging the DNA. And we'd like to see how those changes are occurring, again, under these various stresses, after a liftoff, after radiation exposure, after just living a long time in space, and after eating just a very defined diet. We'll also see how they change or revert back after he returns to Earth. Why is this useful for people on Earth? Just as in space, for people on Earth, we want to understand how stress responses directly influence people's DNA. We want to understand these epigenomic changes that occur. We want to understand which ones will be permanent and which ones will be temporary. And ideally, we want to understand this information so we can better manage people's health. If we see certain kind of perturbations in their DNA, we might be able to treat them differently than if we didn't have this information. So in summary, epigenomics is really important. It may in fact be more valuable than understanding your DNA itself, because how you actually change your DNA through your habits, through the food you eat, through your exercise, through how you age, is ultimately going to be very valuable for managing your health. By 2020, half of Americans will become diabetic or pre-diabetic. It's a staggering number. Diabetes is due to the fact you have aberrant metabolism, and your collection of metabolites, if you will, is in fact the metabolome. Metabolites are these key molecules, they're the chemicals in your body that let you do all the things you do. It's the glucose, it's the ATP, it's all these things that give you energy, that let you move, that let you think, that let you digest your food. So much like a car uses gas to power itself and move, we have chemicals that do that, and it also has chemical byproducts that actually get spewed off that are the waste. Now the amazing thing is we can follow all these chemicals and try and get some understanding of people's health state. The mass spectrometer is the instrument they use when they analyze a drop of blood for certain metabolites to make sure people's metabolism is fine, but we also analyze your urine where you can look at secreted metabolites. So controlling your metabolite levels is very, very important. For me, it's glucose. For other people, it's cholesterol. And for others, it may be things we don't even know about yet. So we are trying to discover the whole collection of these molecules. As we follow Scott and Mark through their journey, both in space and down on Earth, we hope to see this whole collection of changes that occur as people undergo space travel. We know that some chemicals are basically indicative of high stress, and others, we don't know what they do yet. But by following Scott, we hope to see which stress molecules are getting activated and at which times, and what other kinds of metabolites might be happening as he travels on his journey through space, and how does it revert as he comes back to Earth. Mark will be down on Earth and he'll be the control for this. We'll be able to compare the two and see how their changes differ and are the same. One interesting aspect of this whole study is that Scott is actually under a very defined diet. And your diet definitely controls your metabolome and all your metabolites. So we'll be able to follow which foods cause what kinds of metabolite changes and how that changes over time. And it'll be very informative to see exactly how what you eat determines what you are chemically. And so it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this all plays out. At the end of the day, metabolomics is a really important field because it actually lets us follow molecules that are very directly important for our health, and it also is something we can control through our diet and other means. Did you know we have 10 times as many microbes that live in and on us as our own human cells? That is to say, we have 3 to 5 pounds of microbes that live in our gut. You might think this is scary, but it's actually very, very important. Our collection of microbes is called our microbiome. It's our bacteria, it's our viruses, it's the fungi, and they're normally very healthy, happy things. When you eat yogurt, you're actually eating microbes. And these actually make a very healthy flora, if you will, that inhabits our gut. It's also on our skin and everywhere in our body. And this is very crucial for our health because the gut microbiome, for example, it basically digests our food, it makes essential vitamins we ourselves can't make, and basically controls our nutrition. So the net result is that your microbiome is just super important for your health. Direct links have been made between the microbiome and diabetes, also obesity, and things like inflammatory bowel disease. It's also been suggested to have an effect on other things like depression, autism, anything you can imagine, and that's because your microbiome is making incredible metabolites, some of which may ultimately control your behavior, although we don't really understand this very well. So there's a lot of investigation to do to be able to understand these links between your microbiome, your food, and your behavior. There's a key metabolite that's been implicated in heart attacks that's made by your microbiome. So people who eat a lot of red meat make something called carnitine. That gets converted into a compound called TMAO, and TMAO has actually been associated with heart attacks in humans. And it's your microbiome that converts the carnitine into TMAO. So by trying to control people's microbiome, we hope to be able to actually control people's health, not only for things like diabetes and obesity, but also for things you wouldn't necessarily have guessed, like heart attacks. Understanding the microbiome will be hugely important for understanding and managing space travel. With the twin astronauts, we're going to see what kinds of changes occur as people get blasted off through space and as they live in space for a long period of time. This will be very important when people go on multi-year missions to Mars and other places. But by understanding how these changes occur, we should be able to control people's diet, or maybe even take probiotics that would actually affect their microbiome and help manage people's health better as they go on these long and stressful journeys. The microbiome is an important part of the omics puzzle. It's something you can control through diet and probiotics, and it's very valuable then for not only managing folks in space, but also for people here on Earth. We're entering a revolutionary new period of personalized medicine. We're going to be shifting from treating people once they have disease to actually predicting and preventing disease. We're going to do that through analyzing people's genomes and making billions of measurements, so-called omics measurements, that will be able to let us see things in molecular detail. We'll be able to enhance people's health while they're healthy, rather than trying to fix them after they've got a serious disease problem. Omics is a discipline, if you will. It's the collection of measurements of your biomolecules. It's your DNA, your RNA, your proteins, your metabolites, and even your microbiome. Together, they give you a very complete picture of what you look like when you're healthy and also when you're sick. What's driving a lot of this whole new era of medicine and health is this new revolution in technologies. We're using data and big data to actually try and understand and manage people's health. In the future, some of it will come through your smartphone and other places to actually better help you manage your health in a data-driven fashion. The biggest challenge is trying to interpret and analyze all the data. What's amazing about this particular investigation is that we're bringing together 10 experts all studying Mark and Scott. And basically, they're each studying different components. And each, if you will, is a different piece of the omics puzzle. And our job is actually to integrate all of those pieces so that we get a nice picture of what's happening while they're healthy and when they go through these various stresses, such as being shot into space, living in space and eating all the space food, and even returning back to Earth. The nice thing about having these astronauts measured in incredible detail is we'll see what kinds of perturbations, what kinds of changes, if you will, stresses, actually cause what kinds of outcomes. And we hope to use that kind of information to better manage people's health on Earth. So by taking billions of measurements, we'll see what kinds of subtle changes can occur or dramatic changes, and then understand what kinds of drugs or diet or exercise could be better used to treat people to keep them happy and healthy. So omics, we think, is going to be a big game changer because we're going to see things at a resolution, at a level no one's ever seen before. We're going to be able to better understand when you're healthy and when you're sick, and we're going to see how this differs for different people. That is to say, why certain things make you sick but not other people, and vice versa. We want to understand all these things at an individual level so that we can best manage health for you. And that's really the power of personalized medicine.